Welcome back to the Kino Cave, and today I am back with the Costuming Chronicles series, with Daredevil Born Again dropping very, very soon. I was really in the mood for some Daredevil content. I was rewatching the show myself because I was just getting in the mood for it. I rewatched the Ben Affleck movie, and I've just been consuming all things Daredevil. I'm reading Born Again as well, the comic book, and Matthew Murdock is one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. I just find him an endlessly interesting character from every kind of perspective. I love his stories, I love his challenges, I love what he faces every day, and I love the concept as well of like a devil themed superhero costume. A hero that dresses like a devil is just really interesting to me just on its own. I really loved Mark Steven Johnson's Daredevil when I was a kid, specifically the director's cut. I didn't even see the theatrical cut until I was like an adult, so I only ever knew the director's cut and I thought it was amazing. And having watched it again recently, I have to say it still holds up pretty well. Some of it isn't so great, but I gotta say the director's cut is still a pretty decent movie, all things considered. And the Netflix show is possibly my favorite television show ever. It's just so inspiring from a filmmaking perspective, and it's such a well constructed television show as well, the 3 seasons. And that's why I'm very scared for Daredevil Born Again, but we'll see. Someday I'll get into the Daredevil TV series and I'll talk about why I love it so much. With all that said, let's get into the comic book origins of Daredevil's costume. So, Daredevil debuted in 1964, and he was designed by Jack Kirby and Bill Everett. Very little is known about how much input either person had on the design of Daredevil. It's likely that Jack Kirby came up with the Billy Club idea, but otherwise it was pretty even mix of Kirby and Everett. Unfortunately, both of these people passed away, a long time ago, so there's little information really known. And this original design was the yellow and red and kind of blackish brown costume that has become kind of just base level Daredevil trivia. Like, the way people who kind of get into the Halloween films and the first fact you ever learn about Michael Myers is that his mask is a Captain Kirk mask. This is the same thing but for Daredevil, and it's kind of insane that this only lasted 6 issues before it was immediately redesigned because it looked kind of silly and it's not really meant to be the proper costume. And yet we still got homage to it in a certain thing, which I'll give my opinion on later on in the video, but yeah, it's kind of crazy that this thing that's almost become iconic at this point only lasted about 6 issues before it was immediately canned. So Daredevil was redesigned by Wally Wood after about 6 issues, and Wood was basically given complete freedom to do whatever Wood wanted. I'll just give you a second to finish laughing about Wood. It's a dick joke. You done? Okay. So Wood got complete creative freedom to design this costume, and he wanted it to look more satanic, really lean into the devil part of Daredevil. And so he made it completely red, added an extra D onto the logo, because Daredevil, the alliteration, and he just wanted to give it a more satanic feel overall, and it 100% works. The early, Wally Wood design of Daredevil is just perfect, and they've never really strayed too far away from that in later comic books. I know that they've gone back to the yellow and red in Daredevil Yellow, and sometimes they make it like black, like mostly black with red accents, but the overall kind of look is still the same. I think the reason why Daredevil has kind of never really been fully redesigned after this is because it's just perfect. There's nothing you can really do to add to it or to make it better. Like, you look at Spider-Man and he's had like 100 different costumes, and you look at Batman and he's been redesigned again and again and given, completely different looks, for better or worse. But Daredevil has always been red clad, horns on the head, D on the chest, and he's always got this kind of ninja kind of feel to him. And it's iconic. It's incredible. It's one of the best designed superhero costumes ever. Despite popular myth, Stan Lee had no involvement in Bollywood's redesign of Daredevil. A lot of people think that Stan Lee wanted Wood to design Daredevil a certain way. He had absolutely no input whatsoever. A lot's been coming out about Stan Lee, in the last couple of years about how he kind of took a lot more credit than maybe he deserved and all that kind of thing. And there's a conversation to be had about that, but it's really not in a video about Daredevil. But it's a popular myth that Stan Lee told Bollywood to make it a certain way. That's absolutely not true. Wally Wood was given complete creative freedom, and he made literally just whatever he wanted. He designed the entire comic book however he felt like. That's the comic book origins of Daredevil's costume. There's not really much else to it because, again, the costume itself is just kind of perfect, and there's nothing else that needs to be done. And I feel like there's no justification needed for any element of the Wally Wood redesign because it's just completely lightning in a bottle perfect, I think. With that, we move on to the first film adaptation of Daredevil in 2003, Mark Steven Johnson's Daredevil, starring Ben Affleck as Matt Murdock. I know that there have been live action versions of Daredevil previously, and there's obviously been a lot of animated versions. I kind of, for Costuming Chronicles, want to keep it in the realm of live action because I like to get into how the costume was designed and created for a live action format. I know that Daredevil showed up in, I think, the Incredible Hulk TV show, but it was like one episode of that show and the costume's not really remarkable in any way, and I feel like there's not going to be much interesting trivia around that. I'd rather go with projects that feature Daredevil. I'd rather stick to projects that feature Daredevil quite heavily and, they have more interesting stories behind them. With that being said, let's get into the 2003 film, because holy crap, it was a shit show on that movie. So, James Aitchison was the costume designer for Daredevil, and this guy is a legend. He has some pretty major credits as a costume designer, which include Dangerous Liaisons, The Man in the Iron Mask, Spider-Man, Sam Raimi's film, and Man of Steel. So, this guy knows his way around a superhero costume. So the story goes, and this can all be found on the Blu-ray for the Daredevil film. James Aitchison was approached by Mark Steven Johnson, who brought him kind of like a little statue thing of comic book Daredevil, and basically asked him to make that. And Aitchison was delighted. He looked at it and just went, "Yep, I can do this." A week later, Aitchison gets a call saying, "Yeah, all that's getting thrown out. We now don't know if we want it to be red. We don't know if we want it to have horns. We're completely reconceptualizing this whole thing. This might be the most like neurotic film production, at least of that era. Like, you see the Sam Raimi movie and it's obvious that Raimi was kind of just told to do whatever he felt like, but with Mark Steven Johnson, the studios were constantly breathing down his neck. It was always going more towards like an X-Men or more towards a Spider-Man, and Johnson, who was a massive fan of Daredevil, kind of just wanted to do his own thing and make something that was really true to the comic books. And according to Aitchison, they had a 40-minute conversation just about the color red and how red they wanted the Daredevil costume to be. They didn't even know if they wanted it to be red at all. They wanted it to be a very muted kind of a red because they were apparently afraid that it would look too much like Spider-Man, which in the early 2000s I kind of get, but when you look at the films, they're obviously two completely different superheroes. And if anything, having a superhero that looks like the one that was already incredibly successful, would that not boost your film even more? It's like, oh, it's a character that looks like Spider-Man. Maybe this film's going to be a bit like Spider-Man. And they apparently went through every shade of red that they could find until they finally settled on something. And having looked at the behind the scenes, documentaries about this movie, on the Blu-ray, they very clearly toned down the red of the costume in post-production, because when you look at it on set, it's a very bright, very nice looking Daredevil deep red. And then in the film, it looks almost black. There was even a conversation at one point about Daredevil just dressing in a sweatshirt and jeans and just fighting crime like a vigilante dressed like that. I mean, that's what I wear on a daily basis. It's just a shirt and jeans. That's not a superhero costume. Like, I know that there's a whole conversation about like kind of, you know, prototype superhero costumes, and it's just like a shirt and jeans, or it's a shirt and cargo pants, and there are a lot of superhero costumes out there that are terrible, that they're literally just like army gear and then like a small logo or something like that. But I mean, this would be like if Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man wore this for the entire movie. It'd be terrible. This is a quote from James Aitchison. For somebody who supposedly is the man without fear, there was an awful lot of frightened people around. I couldn't even imagine trying to make a film, like a passion project, based on a character that I loved, and having this much fear around basic things like the most iconic parts of the costume being the silhouette of the horns and even the color of the costume, even the logo on the chest. It's amazing that this costume turned out as good as it did, and I understand a lot more why they didn't have a costume for anybody else. Like, everybody makes fun of the fact that Colin Farrell says, I want a fucking costume, and then never gets one. Of course he didn't. Imagine the whole conversation around how blue Bullseye can be. Through all of this, though, Mark Steven Johnson stuck to his guns and fought hard to keep it looking like comic book Daredevil. And people make fun of it, but I quite like this costume. I think, obviously, the red should look like it does in the behind the scenes. But, I mean, it looks slick. It looks, you know, very nice form to Ben Affleck's body, which I'll get into in a second. You know, it looks sleeker than, like, the X-Men costumes. And, you know, it's nice and clean. There's no over-design, which happens a lot in modern superhero costumes. You know, there's added lines and added stuff to make it look more realistic, I guess, even though this is a real costume and it looks perfect. So, while there are a few things that could have been done better, for the era, I think this is a really good superhero costume. Getting into the process of creating this costume, they took a mold of Ben Affleck's entire body so that they could create a costume that fits him exactly. And nowadays, like, they do just like a CGI scan and create it that way, which is fair. But I gotta appreciate the work that goes into creating a plaster mold of Ben Affleck, including his head and face. He had to sit there while the plaster dried with just two holes cut in so he could breathe. And I gotta commend Affleck for sitting or standing like that for possibly hours, but then also the crew for going the extra mile and making it look the best it can possibly look. So they made a head sculpt of Ben Affleck, and then they sculpted the shape of the mask on top of that, and they vacuum formed this material to it so that it was a hard face shell that looks exactly right and it will fit Ben Affleck exactly. And then they cover that in a red kind of faux leather type thing, which was, I think, black originally, and then they painted over with a special type of red paint. And that's how they created the mask, and, you know, most of the costume would have been created in a similar way. And again, just that amount of work put into this it's on a level that you don't often see in superhero costumes anymore. A lot of corners are cut, especially with the rise of like visual effects and that. This is a real costume that is really in the space and it fits Ben Affleck, and there's no tweaks that need to be made to it. It's just exactly as is. It looks like Daredevil is a real person living in the world that we're seeing on screen. So from conception to creation, This was a 7 to 8 month long process. I couldn't even imagine the stress of spending almost a year, like literally 3 quarters of a year, just trying to figure out what your main character looks like in the film. And I mean, this is just the costume. There's so much more that needs to be figured out with filmmaking while you're filming it, creating other costumes for your main character and costumes for your other characters, getting visual effects sorted, figuring out shots and all that. The fact that they spent so long on just a costume, a process that probably should have only taken 2 or 3 months most, that is insane. And I commend Mark Steven Johnson for sticking to his guns as hard as he could, because I can't imagine the amount of stress that he must have been under. With all that said, time to move on to the Netflix TV series. Starting with the season 1 look, the Frank Miller inspired black vigilante costume. The costume designer for season 1 was Stephanie Maslansky, I think. Maslansky. My apologies if I pronounced that incorrectly, but she was a costume designer on season 1, and she talked a lot about how she collaborated with Joe Quesada, and so she collaborated a lot with Joe Quesada, who was editor-in-chief of Marvel Studios at the time, and Stephen DeKnight, who was a showrunner for season 1 of Daredevil, and there was a lot of conversation between those two on what the look should be for season 1 Daredevil when he's kind of in his early days. And there's a quote here from Stephanie Maslansky: "It distinctly paid homage to the black costume illustrated by John Romita Jr. in The Man Without Fear." So that was kind of the first inspiration for it. The idea is this is like a proto suit, like the suit from Raimi's Spider-Man when he's doing the wrestling, or in Spider-Man Homecoming before he gets the Stark suit and that. This is definitely like a proto Daredevil suit, and you know, it's great because it was inspired by the comic book, and also Maslansky talks about how she wanted it to look like Matt just assembled these pieces by shopping around and going on the internet, and there's even a quote in the show where Matt explains that he got most of this stuff from the internet. So it's pretty simple, and it's quite inspiring. I remember a lot of the time when I was first watching the show when I was like a teenager, and I was like really into cosplay, and which I still am in fairness, but I had like this stretchy piece of black fabric just lying around from something else, and I used to like wrap that around my head and I could like half see through it, and I think I had like a long sleeve black shirt, so I used to like cosplay this version of Daredevil just in my bedroom and just take pictures of it because I just found it fun. And I think that's kind of the point of these prototype suits. What I love about prototype suits for superhero stuff is this is the suit that doesn't cost thousands of dollars to make or buy and make it look like good, like make it look like anything. These proto suits are ones that you can literally make from stuff you have lying around. You can make the proto Spider-Man costumes with just some red fabric and like a hoodie or a shirt or some tracksuit pants. And it's the same with this Daredevil costume. So I really appreciate stuff like that. The mask was most significant though. They really worked on making the mask look good, but also functional and not silly, because I think it'd be easy to make it look very silly. And she also wanted it to look like Matt just like put it together like in his home, like he just got some black fabric and just made a mask out of it. For the end of season 1, the red costume was designed by Ryan Mienerding. I'm gonna be terrible with these names, so I do apologize for getting them wrong, but let's just keep calling him Ryan, okay? I'll put his name here. I'll put up a picture of him if there's a picture on the internet of this guy. I think he did a great job with this suit. The suit gets a lot of shit on the internet, but I quite like it. So well done, Ryan. And this is a quote from Ryan: "I think the way that it manifested itself in the costume was through the armor and making it feel a little more padded than you traditionally think of Daredevil being." So there was obviously a mandate of like make this look tactical, which it doesn't exactly work for Daredevil considering he's an acrobat. You feel like his costume should be much more light, more Spider-Man-esque. You know, he's more about dodging and stuff like that. But tactical suits were in at the time for superheroes. That's just the way it was going. You know, the MCU looked like that, the Dark Knight looked like that. So I do understand that direction. What is interesting about Ryan's design was that the black portions are actually meant to represent the inking on a comic book. You see Daredevil, and especially ones where the suit is a much darker red, there's a lot of black filled in, and the red is just the highlights. You can see this in the mask, which I don't think worked as well, and it's clear why they redesigned it. But you can see it in the mask, and you can see it on the chest as well, the black portions. And when you think about it that way, it does look like shadow with red highlights. In season 2, the suit was only slightly redesigned, mostly in the cowl. I couldn't really find much information on specifically redesigning the cowl because that was the most significant redesign. But the costume designer Lorraine Calvert, or Calvert, I'm not sure. Again, I apologize. But Lorraine redesigned the suit to be a bit more fluid and much more tactical in season 2. And I'm guessing that probably extended to the mask to make it look a bit more fluid, a bit shinier, a bit sleeker. But the whole suit got a slight redesign just to look a little bit better, a little bit sleeker, which makes a lot of sense. Calvert mostly talks about how she designed Elektra's costume, which is fascinating, and I would recommend reading interviews from Calvert about Daredevil season 2. But she talks a lot about how she designed Elektra, which is very, very interesting. But not much was done with Matt's costume in this. The costume designer on season 3 was Liz Vastola. Here's a quote from her: "Everything about the black costume is meant to be violent and intimidating." Vastola wanted the character to look more kind of ragged and rough and dirty to kind of represent where Matt is at mentally. And she just wanted it to look really violent and gritty, which definitely matches the tone of season 3. While I do kind of feel it's sad that we didn't get a classic red Daredevil suit for more of the show. Like, it was there throughout season 2, at the very, very end of season 1, and it was in Defenders. It's kind of crazy that there's 2 whole seasons of Daredevil where we just got like a black costume that's Frank Miller inspired. However, I do see the philosophy behind these costume designs. I do really like the season 3 costume. At first glance, it looks exactly the same, but you can see still the red poking through from underneath the black shirt, and I love the rope gauntlet idea and the little bit of white as well on the face mask. I think it really elevates the costume, and I think it really adds to it, and it does represent Matt incredibly well, so I'm not mad about it. The rope gloves on Matt's arms in season 3 are actually a reference to a Muay Thai technique. Muay Thai is a martial art, I'm guessing from Thailand, based on the name, and it is a rope technique used in Muay Thai, and that's what referenced the rope gloves, which is really interesting. I like the bit of martial arts infused in there because Matt Murdock is a character that's very heavily focused on martial arts and boxing and that. So for She-Hulk, I could not find anything from the costume designer on Daredevil specifically. All I could find was from Charlie Cox, and it seems to be just he walked in for a costume fitting and it was yellow. And that was kind of it. And you see it in the show and it's like, yeah, they didn't do anything. They just colored it yellow and different shade of red. And there's a reason why this look only lasted 6 issues in the comic books. So that is all the information on these costumes that I could find anyway. And just to give a quick rundown of my opinion and thoughts on all of them, I really like the 2003 suit. I think that it was the best that they could have done at the time. I think it's sleek. I think it's acrobatic. I don't mind the fact that it's leather. If the red was the actual color that it was, I think it'd be damn near perfect. Moving on to the Netflix show, I really like the Frank Miller inspired season 1 suit, though maybe it overstayed its welcome a little bit, or maybe I just kind of want to see more of the red suit. which I guess we're getting in Born Again, but I'm still very skeptical about that show. Then the end of season one suit is, I think, quite good, and I think that while it could have been maybe sleeker and a bit more acrobatic, I still really like the design philosophy around it. And that cowl redesign in season two is gorgeous. I love that cowl. And I even cosplayed this version of Daredevil a few years ago. Here's a picture, hopefully. I hope I can find it. Then moving on to the season 3 suit, I really like it. I think it's an elevation of the Frank Miller inspired season 1 suit. I love the peaks of red in there. I love the rope gloves. I love the white peeking out under the mask. I think it works really, really well. And it fits so well with the themes of the season. There's a reason why people love season 3 of Daredevil so much. And truth is, this suit really does reflect that. When it comes to the She-Hulk look, what can I say? It's kind of lazy, and I don't think the yellow and black costume was ever really going to work that well in live action anyway. But if they were going to do it, they could at least have actually made it instead of just sprayed it a different color. Yeah, I won't get into my thoughts about She-Hulk too much because, man, that show was divisive, but I feel like they kind of just did it for the sake of doing it. You know, what narrative purpose does it have being yellow other than look at that thing that didn't really last in the comic books, and it doesn't work anyway because the lore reason that they gave for the yellow suit is that it was pieces of Jack Murdoch's boxing gear, just kind of hastily sewed together by Matt before he got the better and nicer suit. And that design philosophy is obviously not there for this one, so I don't know. Looking forward to the Born Again costume, I think the color is a lot better, but I think in general it looks largely the same as the kind of season 2 costume. It looks very bulky and very heavily padded, which doesn't really work for Daredevil. Like, it's even more heavily padded than the season 2 suit. The color, I think, is excellent, though. I think the color, they got it just right there. So I guess we'll have to see. I'm still kind of just dying for a costume that's a bit more comic book, like a bit closer to that look, you know. Just make it like a skin tight kind of Spider-Man type suit without using CGI like they do with the Spider-Man suits, and give us the D's, for God's sakes. You know, give us the double D's. I'll give you a moment to laugh at double D as well. Okay, so look, I wouldn't say I'm excited for Daredevil Born Again. I'm scared. I'm scared of where this is going, but I'd love to see my boy Charlie back in that costume, so we'll see what happens. I hope to see more Daredevil stuff in the future, and if you enjoyed this and you want to see more videos like this, then hit subscribe. Comment, what's your favorite Daredevil costume across all media? Is there another like live action interpretation that I've forgotten about? I'm sure there is. So, you know, comment, let me know. And if you like the video, please do give it a like. There will surely be more Daredevil content coming in the future. And with all that, have a really great day, everybody.